Hey everyone, it's Mr. Souther coming at you with a video about Unit 4, Lesson 2. We're going to be talking about static variables and methods, and I'm going to kind of explain what's going on here with the code and how it's kind of unique. Okay, so let's get started, and I'll kind of keep cycling through this. Um, so essentially what we want to do is we want to go over, these are just slides from code.org, right? So we're covering Unit 4, Lesson 2. And so I'm going to go through their slides because I thought they were really good. I want to show it to you, and then we'll dive into the code in a minute. Essentially, what we're doing is we need to know that in the past, we would have spawned an object or instantiated an object. And when you do that, it takes on all of its instance variables. So example for painter Amy or painter Rosie, they have their own location for X and Y values. They have their own direction that they're facing and how much paint they're remaining, right? So we covered this when we were using constructors to instantiate our objects. All right. So something interesting you're going to need to pay attention to now is if you when we go to lesson 2 in unit 4, you'll see that all of a sudden there's a static keyword that pops up. And at first glance, you're kind of like, well, what's static doing? Again, in code.org, they kind of just introduce this stuff, and the point is, we, the instructors, and the PowerPoint slides should help kind of clarify what it is we're looking at. So here's the deal. So static variables, as you can see in this case, in line 2, is when you see the static keyword, what's happening is, in this case, we're creating a variable and it's attached essentially to the class. In other words, any object I instantiate from this class will have this static variable attached to it. So in this case, you'll notice it says public static string school, and specifically codes it as neighborhood high school. So what that means is this is for a class of a student, okay, a class called student. So let's say spawn or instantiate a bunch of student objects. So student Olivia, student Amelia, there's student Josh, there's student Sean, right, et cetera, et cetera. They might have their own names, their own grade level they're in, and their own schedules. However, what all of them will share in common is that they are all belonging to the neighborhood high school. So what's really neat is rather than continuing to try and modify that for each object, the static variable allows me to essentially anything that is created from this class will have that variable attached to it. So it's pretty cool. The private instance variables here, those are going to be, and this is why we use this keyword later, it's going to be attached or localized to that specific object. And the idea is the object, say a student named Sean, is instantiated and it has its own name, grade, and schedule, versus another student object that's created called Sam might have its own name, grade, and schedule. However, what both of them will share because they are pointing to the student class is they will both have the same school, and that's that static variable. So that's kind of cool, and it makes it more efficient for us, right? Okay, I won't show you the video, but the main thing you need to know is that the static variable is attached to the class, not the object. So what that means, though, is later on, if you want to print one of these variables, we're so ingrained to and trained to use the object to call a method, or in this case, to use a variable. However, we don't need to use the object anymore. It'll be attached to the class. So it's kind of one big shift that we have to pay attention to. Okay, so what I want to go through is the difference between instance methods and static methods. So we talked about variables, but what about cases where we want to paint or take paint or whatever it is? We've been dealing with instance methods. So these are methods that belong to the instances of the class. So if I want to get name or get grade or whatever it is, those are attached to the class and associates with those objects. So for example, back in unit 1 when we were painting, when you spawned or instantiated a painter object and their name was Sarah, well, you would use that object to call the method .move. And it's not static because you wouldn't have seen the static keyword, so it's not attached to the class. However, in case of a static method, what's happening is you need to basically use the class to call the method. So in this case, you'll see that print num painters is only being able to be called not by Sarah, but by the actual name of the class called painter plus. That's really important because static methods are going to be something that, again, is associated with the class. So you might ask, well, why does it matter? at least in our introductory, Java class, what you need to know is that rather than me having to spawn an object every time to use one of these methods, I don't need to do that anymore. So if I just want to call a method that's associated with the class, I could just use these static methods. So rather than doing painter Amelia equals new painter, blah, 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 and then using that painter object to call the method, in this case, I could just go straight to painter dot and then get paint or whatever that static variable or static method might be. So it does make it a little bit faster. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a second so I can switch gears to the actual code. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears and go to unit 4, lesson 2 on static variables and methods. Okay. And essentially what I want to do now is I'm going to go through kind of one of these prompts, if you will. So one of the prompts I want to go through, let's just do food truck. Okay, we're going to practice how do we use static variables. So I'm going to kind of explain this as we go along. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is I'm going to zoom in just so I can see here. And you can see more importantly. Okay, so we have a couple to-dos. First thing we need to do is I'm going to go ahead and they want me to go to foodtruck.java and do a couple things. Again, it's always a good idea when you're in code.org or even for the AP exam for that matter to see what code is existing. There's a reason all this code is here, right? It's to support the work you're about to do. So I see two classes. The tester class is foodtruck_runner, and then we have another class called foodtruck.java. So I can see in food truck runner, there's already two food truck objects that are instantiated, and one's called Rosie, one's called Aaron. And then there's some sort of printing of using the food truck class to call a business name variable or value. So let's look at foodtruck.java. I see we have public class food truck. There's a private instance variable called private string owner. And then what they're asking me to do here, which they've already done, is they've declared and initialized a static variable. Let me go ahead and just make sure I'm not, let me clear this because it looks like I might have jumped the gun a bit there. So let me clear it because it already had the static variable. Okay, here we go. Yep, there you go. So sorry, I already had coded in this and forgot to clear it out. Okay, so going back to food truck, we have the private instance variable. We're going to declare and initialize a static variable called business name to Joyful Pastries. So how are we going to do that? We're going to keep public, right? We're going to use a static keyword, and then comes the data type, which is string because it's text. And they wanted me to call it business name with a capital M and keep it as Joyful Pastries. And there you go. Again, good idea to run it every time you create some new line of code. No errors. That's perfect. And then that's to-do number 1. Now in to-do number 2, we're going to go ahead and go back to food truck runner, print the value of the business name for each food truck object. Okay, then change the value of the business name to a different name and print the new value. Okay, so a couple things we need to do. First things first, let's go ahead and print. So in this case, we have what is that? Rosie's food truck. Okay, and we want to print the name, right? So it's business name. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for what was the other one? Aaron's food truck. So I'm using those objects to call that variable. So if I go ahead and run it, we shall see that Joyful Pastries is being presented. Okay, so at first glance, you're kind of like, what's going on here? So I printed the value of the business name. So we did that. So when you want the value of the business name, right? If you use Rosie's food truck and then business name, well, why is it showing Joyful Pastries twice? Well, that's because guess what? In these cases, we use the objects, but the business name is a static variable. So it's going to go ahead and just show Joyful Pastries. So it doesn't matter which food truck object you're using, they will always show that. Then they want me to change it. So I can just change it right here, actually. So in order to change the value of the variable, I could go back to the class and change it directly there, or I can go right here and use the class name, the dot operator, and then the variable name, business name, and go ahead and set it equal to, what do they want? Java donuts, it looks. Oh, wait, what do they change the value? Oh, to a different name. I don't know what I'm doing here. So, oh, okay, got it. So I'm gonna create a new name. I don't know, Chick-fil-A for all I care, right? No free ads. But here we go, YouTube. So I'm gonna go ahead and change it to that. And then if we do the same thing and print them, it should update for both food truck objects. And there you go. So there we go. We've updated it. So that's all done. Let me do a test. And it created or finished it. So it's perfect. Let's go ahead and go to module 7. So that was specifically with variables. Now what happens when we want to do, let's see. So in module 7, what should I do? I already did grade checker, so why don't we do project budget? I'm going to avoid the theater class stuff just because I think it's unnecessarily complicated when we're just trying to learn about static methods and static variables. Okay, so in this case, there's two things we've got to do. One, we're going to go ahead and type in or code. It looks like the calc engineers pay method. Okay, so that's going to happen, and that's going to be a static method we got to write. So I'm going to go ahead and go to projectmanager.java because that's where they want it. And there's a couple of things they're telling me here. It says so when you write that method, they want some sort of parameters. So let's go ahead and write it first. So it's going to be public, static, and then it looks like we're going to use they want to return the total budget divided by num engineers as a double. So that means my return type is double. So it's public, static, double. And then it looks like we call it calc engineers pay. Now, specifically, they want some sort of parameter here, right? That's what they're telling me. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of put that there as a placeholder to get us started. For the parameters, check out what they want. They're asking us to take the parameters total budget and num engineers. Okay. So total budget and num engineers. So it tells me right here, it might be hard to see on YouTube, but double total budget. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that in. So we got double total budget. And then we have int num engineers. So the engineers. So those are the two variable or two parameters it wants me to take in. Okay, easy enough. Now what they want me to do is return. It looks like they just want me to find the average engineer pay. So I have the total budget and I have the number of engineers. So my engineers pay should just be the total budget divided by the number of engineers, right? Which it tells me in the instructions too. So I'm going to take that total budget, that parameter, divide it by the number of engineers, and then boom, it's going to go ahead and return whatever that is. Let's go ahead and run this to make sure I don't have any errors. So far, so good. And recall that this is a static method. So in part 2, what they want me to do is they want me to call that calc engineers pay method and print the result. Now, remember in this case, though, I need to be careful because I'm tempted to instantiate an object, but I don't need to because it's a static method. So I can actually just use the name of the class, so project manager dot calc engineers pay. The only problem I guess I'm going to run into is they want me to actually take in some sort of values here. Okay, so I need some sort of parameters for the pay. And what was it again? Sorry, I'm kind of blanking. So we want some sort of total budget number of engineers. I guess I could just keep it really simple, make it $1,000 budget and 10 people, right? So it's going to go ahead and calculate that pay. The only problem here is we're going to have a number, right? So if I run this, actually, let's just see what runs it. The only problem I see happening is I'm not storing it anywhere. Okay, so nothing shows, no problem. Maybe, is it possible for me to just print this? I don't know. I'm just kind of playing around a bit. I'm kind of curious on where it's going to store whatever this value is. So that makes me a little bit nervous. Okay, so I did the calculation. So we did project manager, which is the class name, to call using a dot operator, the method with two arguments that I put in. I just want to make sure I'm not, let me test it. I might have missed something in the to do's because I'm kind of doing this quickly. Oh, I succeeded all ways. Okay, perfect. So we just do that. All right, let's move on to, it looks like module 8. So again, the idea is we're just going to keep kind of looking at, hey, what can we do to just understand how to use static variables, how do we call them, how do we use static methods, and how do we use those. The main thing is you need to know static methods and variables are attached to a class, not any single object. Okay. Let's do Kickstarter objects. Letting it load. Okay, let me zoom in a bit. All right. So in this case, what they want us to do is they want us to uh, declare and initialize a static variable called num projects to be 0. So that's going to be in the project.java class. So here we are. So right off the bat, I see private instance variables. Very nice. And then here's the to do. So we're going to declare and initialize a static variable called num projects to 0. Okay, no problem. And if we want to do that, right, we're going to go ahead. And because this is does it tell me if it's public or private? I guess because all of these other variables are private, let's just keep it the same. And then I'm going to use a static keyword. And then I know that this is the num projects is set to 0. So that's an integer data type, right? So my my data type is int, and it wants me to call it num projects. You just set it equal to 0. I'm going to go ahead and run this just to make sure as I go along that I'm not running into any errors, which is the case. Okay. So that's done for number one. Number two, in the project constructor, increment num projects by 1. Okay, so where's the constructor? Here we go. So public project name, right? int num backers, right? So all that's done. And then within that, all they're asking me to do, oh, here it is to increment num projects by 1. There we go. Okay. So if I take num projects and just you could do num equals num projects plus 1. If you want to be old school, but if you want to be even faster, we just write num projects plus plus. Both of these will do the same thing. So I'm just going to comment that out. Let's go ahead and run it. And I did that. So in case you're wondering, Souther, how'd you know how to do this? Well, it tells me I just did what it told me to do. Project constructor, that's where I'm at, right here. Right, I'm going to go ahead and increment, just delete that so it's a little space. We're going to go ahead and increment num projects. So every time I use the project constructor, it's going to add 1 to num projects, keeping in mind that num projects is a static variable, right? So once I make the change here, it's going to go ahead and add 1. Now, just to explain very quickly, why is this the case, right? Essentially, what we're trying to do is every time I create a project, it wants to add 1 to the counter. So it's kind of important. So I know how many projects are already out there. Okay, so we did that. Done. I didn't get any errors. Now it want me to write a static method. So it's going to come down here called get num projects. And what it's going to do is it's going to, let me just try and delete some of the space. And it wants me to do what? So I got a static method called get num projects. Let's go ahead and get that started. So public static, and then it's going to return a string. So there's my string data type, and then get num projects. And it's going to go ahead and return something that's going to be a string containing the text. There are bracket num projects on Kickstarter. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a concatenation, right? And the quotation marks to say there are, say, for right now, 1 projects on Kickstarter. It's kind of like that. Okay. And again, the plus signs, they just mean concatenation. So I'm trying to chain together the words there are, and then whatever num projects is, which right now is just set to be 0. But every time I instantiate a project object, it's going to add 1 to my num projects, right? So if I create 2 objects, 2 project objects, it's going to return there are 2 projects on Kickstarter. So is there anything else I need to do? And then they want, so that's done. Okay, now I can go back to Project Runner. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and create several project objects, then call the get num projects and print the result. Okay. I have to be careful because they want me to have all of those basically. And I believe they're probably going to want me to test that. So what I can do is let's make project name Pebble Time. So Pebble Time equals new project. So I'm just instantiating a bunch of objects. Pebble Time. It wants the number of backers to be 78471. The category is product design. And just because I'm feeling a little bit nervous, I'm going to check the constructor, which it wants me, yep, it's going to take in the name, the number of backers as an integer, and then a category. Okay, so that's that. I'm going to go ahead and run this just to make sure there's nothing wrong here. Okay, so then it wants me to code all this other stuff. And just to save time, let me just go ahead and copy and paste what else I got in my own project. So those are all the projects once all is said and done. And then I'm going to go ahead and run it just to make sure nothing weird is happening here, which it isn't perfect. So then last thing I need to do once I have those, there are four project objects created. So that means when I go ahead and print this out, I'm going to call the static method. Just a reminder, we're not going to use any of these objects to call the static method. We're going to use the class name called project and then use that get num projects method. And it's going to go ahead and tell me how many there are. Let's see if it actually has that text that I typed in. There we go. There are 4 projects on Kickstarter. In fact, there are 1, 2, 3, 4. Go ahead and test it. And this should be it. And there we go. We succeeded. So go ahead and finish it. Let me know if you have questions and good luck.